Welcome to Pop Culture Mess, where we look at the biggest, the best, and the worst in pop culture and entertainment. This episode, we'll be talking about the first 2 episodes of WandaVision, the long-time coming new release from Marvel on Disney+. In particular, we'll be taking a very close look at the references to S.W.O.R.D, and speculate on what the introduction of the S.W.O.R.D agency could mean for the MCU. There was a lot to like about the first 2 episodes of WandaVision. It's the first definitive MCU content in 563 days, an incredibly long time between drinks for one of popular culture's biggest and most prolific creators. It's the first long-form series in the MCU, the new format commencing Marvel's efforts to tell stories that aren't restricted to 2.5-hour blockbuster movies. Most notably though, WandaVision showed Marvel's willingness to tell a story in a more creative way. Marvel's formula for creating movies that tell a character's origin story is now very well worn. The first headline cinematic outings of Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel all have very significant similarities in structure and character journey. It was very refreshing to watch WandaVision without any real surety of what is going to happen for the titular characters. In the same amount of screen time, by 50 minutes into an MCU movie, the audience would know exactly the shortcomings of the yet-to-be hero, generally where they are heading to become the character we know and love, and the antagonist and other circumstances that they'll have to overcome to become the hero. They hit their beats, establish themselves as a character for sequels or larger Avengers crossovers, and we all go home happy and full of popcorn. But excitingly, with WandaVision, that's not the case at all. After 2 episodes, what the audience knows for certain is very little. Episode 1 essentially starts with a whole host of questions, such as the obvious of how the previously dead Vision now appears to be alive, and just what has occurred to place Wanda and Vision into a world derivative of mid-20th century American sitcoms. And episode 2 ends with more questions than we began with. Some of these big open questions include that some of the other people in their suburb from the first episode are also there in episode 2. We can determine that they are the same people due to things like them having the same name, same job, or mentioning the same spouse. But like Wanda and Vision, they're the same age in a world that has seemingly jumped ahead in time by roughly a decade from the first to the second episode. Wanda has moments where she seems unsure of what is going on, where she is, and why she's experiencing this black and white world. In episode 2, colour begins to break through the black and white. Reacting to the first 2 instances of colour, initially Wanda seems scared and completely uncertain as to how this is happening. But the second episode concludes with her viewing Vision and then their whole world in colour, and she welcomes this happily. We, the audience, watch and experience episode 1 as though we're viewing a sitcom episode. And episode 1 concludes by extracting us out of the world of the episode to show that someone has been viewing the same show that we have by using modern day broadcasting equipment. One of the last scenes of episode 2 sees a threatening man crawl out from beneath their street through a manhole. He seems to be wearing a beekeeping suit, with dozens of bees flying around him. After they stare directly at each other, Wanda states, "No," and the episode seemingly rewinds and places her and Vision back in their living room. She asks Vision, "Is this really happening?" And he replies, "Yes, my love, it's really happening," after which their whole world turns to colour. With episode 2, as the end card appears to indicate the conclusion of Wanda and Vision's episode, but before the credits begin for the conclusion of the audience's episode, we hear a voice through what sounds like a transmission asking, "Wanda, who's doing this to you, Wanda?" By closely reviewing and studying WandaVision's Easter eggs, the show's alleged source material, and production details from behind the scenes, it's possible to make some educated guesses and fill in some holes regarding what is going on. That said, by answering some questions, further bigger questions are raised. From the first 2 episodes, the most interesting yet underrated occurrence is the introduction of S.W.O.R.D to the MCU via 2 small Easter eggs. Per the logo on their notepad, we can see that the person who was watching the ostensible broadcast of the first episode is likely from the agency S.W.O.R.D. The beekeeper at the end of the second episode also has the S.W.O.R.D logo on the back of his outfit. Confirmed by set photos and toy material, we also know that WandaVision will feature Maria Rambeau, agent of S.W.O.R.D. The character of Maria Rambeau first appeared in Captain Marvel as the 10-year-old daughter of Monica Rambeau, Carol Danvers' best friend. The second episode of WandaVision features a woman named Geraldine. She is played by the actor Teyonah Parris, who is in the main WandaVision cast as Maria Rambeau. Geraldine seems unsure of what she is doing on an organising committee in the 60s, or why she is running a talent show, or how she managed to find herself transported into a box during a magic trick. In the first preview for WandaVision, we saw Maria Rambeau get shot out of the air out of what seems to be the 70s era and landing into what seems like a contemporary setting. Rambeau lands wearing 70s attire, and we know that the 70s is the era that Wanda and Vision are set to find themselves in either the 3rd or the 4th episode, possibly even both. The place where Maria lands includes armed agents, tents, lights, and a helicopter. It's very likely all of this belongs to the S.W.O.R.D agency. But who are S.W.O.R.D? And what does their introduction mean for the Marvel Cinematic Universe from this point onward? First introduced in Marvel Comics in 2004, when featured in other Marvel material, S.W.O.R.D has generally been an organization whose purpose is to deal with space and extraterrestrial world threats. From Phase 4 insights released by Marvel, we know that WandaVision is part of a trio of releases that will be built around the wider multiverse, along with the 3rd Tom Holland Spider-Man movie and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. In the MCU, Marvel has really already played its hand regarding the S.W.O.R.D agency. S.W.O.R.D was used to great effect from the start of Phase 1 of the MCU, notably its leader Nick Fury and key agent Phil Coulson. Phase 1's use of S.W.O.R.D climaxes in the Avengers in 2012, where Fury drives the plot of the movie, and Coulson's death is the emotional spark the team needs to save the world. Phase 2 of the MCU saw the Marvel's Agents of S.W.O.R.D television show introduced, led by Agent Coulson. Efforts were made in the show's first season to directly cross over characters and plot points from the MCU films, which were generally done successfully. But the ending of Captain America: The Winter Soldier saw the S.W.O.R.D agency dissolved, putting a real spanner in the works for the fledgling show. In the MCU after this, only really Avengers Age of Ultron and Captain America Civil War make clear references to S.W.O.R.D, until the set in the 90s Captain Marvel brings back Fury and Coulson as younger S.W.O.R.D agents. Marvel's Agents of S.W.O.R.D would run for another 6 seasons after the agency was officially dissolved in the MCU. The show saw S.W.O.R.D evolve into an underground agency whose loose agenda was to continue stopping major threats to the world as the plot required. These threats would eventually move from Earth to span across space and then time, with S.W.O.R.D continuing to evolve their organization's goal based on plot, and the agency's only real continuity being the same core group of agents. Though Marvel Agents of S.W.O.R.D was enjoyed by fans over the course of its 8 years and 136 episodes, the agency strayed an incredibly long way from what it was established as in Phase 1 of the MCU. This was also true of Phil Coulson, the core crossover character between the show and the MCU. The final episode of Marvel's Agents of S.W.O.R.D ended with the agency operating as a general protector of the Earth, notably with a S.W.O.R.D Academy pointing towards re-establishing itself as a fighting force in the future. The final episode also saw the S.W.O.R.D agents resolve that season's time-traveling difficulties by utilizing the Quantum Realm. The Quantum Realm had already featured in the MCU in Ant-Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Avengers Endgame. Based on the title, it also seems likely to be central to the plot of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, when released in a couple of years from now. It wouldn't be surprising if Marvel plans to let the agency of S.W.O.R.D lie low and rest within the MCU for the near future. With some time, people will forget about the craziness of Agents of S.W.O.R.D that didn't quite marry with the rest of the MCU. In a few years from now, a decade will have passed since S.W.O.R.D was dissolved within the MCU. By the MCU's own timeline, a decade has already passed. In the future, Marvel could definitively re-establish a new version of S.W.O.R.D that is more in line with what was in Phase 1. This new S.W.O.R.D could even recycle fan-favourite characters from the show without mentioning their adventures within computer frameworks or in outer space with the Kree. In the meantime, in lieu of S.W.O.R.D, it seems that the MCU has had no real difficulty substituting in other real-world government organisations as it's needed. In recent movies, General Thaddeus Ross features as the United States Secretary of State, Everett Ross is a CIA operative, the United Nations are responsible for creating the Sokovia Accords, Killmonger's background involves time spent in the US Army and Black Ops Special Forces, and an important plot driver for Captain Marvel is Carol Danvers' previous life in the US Air Force. But since S.W.O.R.D's dissolution, the MCU has had a hole that just hasn't really been filled. A lack of S.W.O.R.D has left fan favourite Nick Fury somewhat rudderless and underutilised, while sidelining Maria Hill and shifting the popular Coulson out of the central films. Though the MCU's expansion into space and different dimensions has significantly reduced the need for S.W.O.R.D, the argument is there that there's a place for a defensive agency like theirs, especially in comparison to real-world counterparts. An agency like S.W.O.R.D repeatedly appearing serves fans some enjoyable continuity, as do repeat appearances by the agency's characters. So what does that all mean for S.W.O.R.D? It could be, in the MCU, that in addition to dealing with space and extraterrestrial world threats, S.W.O.R.D is being introduced as the agency responsible for reacting to universe-level threats. At the end of Spider-Man Far From Home, we find out that Nick Fury was actually Talos, the shape-shifting Skrull leader, first featured in Captain Marvel. Maria Hill was also the Skrull Soren, Talos' wife. Talos calls Fury, beginning the conversation by saying that he hopes Fury's mission is going well. Talos goes on to say that he needs Fury to come back to Earth and that everyone has been asking where the Avengers are. After hanging up on Talos, we see the real Nick Fury is on a spaceship, which has futuristic technology by Earth standards and is populated by Skrulls. He instructs for everyone on board to get back to work. It's not a significant leap to assume that at the end of Far From Home, Fury is in space setting up S.W.O.R.D with the help of the Skrulls. As the previous leader of Earth's most significant protection agency, his involvement working with the Avengers to save the world from catastrophe, and his experience with the Skrulls and other threats from outer space, Fury is the obvious candidate to set up S.W.O.R.D to be Earth's new protector. Given he met the Skrulls and the Kree in 1995, and Spider-Man Far From Home is seemingly set in the year 2023, Fury has known about space for close to 3 decades. It makes sense that this version of the character of Nick Fury would have made significant efforts since 1995 to establish defenses towards threats from outer space. It's very unlikely that the Avengers Initiative is the best Fury could have come up with in 17 years. A relatively hastily thrown together team of misfits, whose members have only been known for 3 to 4 years, and whose volatility towards each other risks any value that the team could provide. Though he's aware of S.W.O.R.D's flaws, he also knows the value that a well-structured agency can provide. A properly run organisation of hundreds or thousands of agents working towards a common goal would always be Fury's preferred plan A, compared to a ragtag bunch of superheroes pulled together at the last minute. Interestingly, in addition to making sense that Fury would set up something like S.W.O.R.D, there's nothing significant in the MCU to contradict that he hasn't. Following the Chitauri invasion and S.H.I.E.L.D's dissolution, Fury's appearances in the MCU are minimal. He pops up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to rescue Fitz and Simmons from drowning, and then the following year appears in Avengers Age of Ultron to provide some guidance to the team and get them back on track. Following this, we don't see him again until the end of Avengers Infinity War, when he's snapped while calling Captain Marvel for help. Within the MCU, over the course of this 4-year period, we can only definitively account for a few days of Fury's whereabouts. And while it's established that he spends some time chasing down remaining Hydra agents, and that just before he's snapped he's working on something with Maria Hill, we don't really know what he gets up to during this time. It would be fairly straightforward for the MCU to establish that during this time, Nick Fury began working on setting up the agency S.W.O.R.D. Fury could have contacted Talos, his most trustworthy contact from space after Captain Marvel, for assistance in setting up the agency with futuristic technological infrastructure, such as spaceships, weapons, and communication methods. It's easy to imagine that the Skrulls would have been willing to help Earth with this mission towards safety, after Fury helped to save them from the Kree in 1995. Just as important as the technology, the Skrulls would also prove invaluable to learn about the wider universe and the threats that Earth may face. Though he was on Earth when the snap occurred, we know from Captain Marvel that with the right ship, it's quite quick to travel from Earth to a larger space station outside our planet's atmosphere. Other MCU films like Guardians of the Galaxy show that even long distances through space can be travelled fairly quickly by jumping. It's very realistic that from the time S.H.I.E.L.D. was dissolved, Fury began work on setting up S.W.O.R.D, and that during this time period he could have quite easily moved between Earth and space. If he had been setting up S.W.O.R.D, by the time Fury is snapped in Infinity War, it's likely that we need to make an assumption that S.W.O.R.D's defensive capabilities were still far too limited to have been able to protect the Earth against Thanos' attack. Though less than an hour passes in the movie from when Thanos' forces arrive to when he snaps his fingers and leaves, that seems like it would be enough time for S.W.O.R.D to provide some defense if they were able. Even if they are in their infancy, an organization with a specific mission to save Earth from extraterrestrial threats would need a response time of well under an hour. When considering that the Earth has already been attacked twice from space in the 20 hours before the Battle of Wakanda, it seems fairly definitive that at this point in time, S.W.O.R.D did not yet have the capability to defend Earth. When Fury calls Captain Marvel as he's fading away, we have to assume that he's calling Carol as he views her as the Earth's best defensive option in his wake. This is our clearest indication that even if it did exist in 2018, S.W.O.R.D did not yet have defensive capabilities up and running. But with Maria Hill by his side when he's snapped, we have to assume that in 2018 Fury is working on something big, something that already involves other people, and something that involves their shared skill set for defense. What is very possible, and even likely, is that when he was snapped, Fury was in the process of setting up S.W.O.R.D. The setup had reached a stage where not only had Fury gotten things well underway with Talos and the Skrulls, but that he'd brought other people onto the project as well. In the 5 years that passed between Infinity War and Endgame, Talos, the Skrulls, and any people that Fury had brought in could have made significant progress in setting up S.W.O.R.D. With Fury establishing the organization's initial objectives, it's very possible to make the assumption that S.W.O.R.D continued its setup towards becoming Earth's protector from extraterrestrial threats. What we again have to note though is that in Endgame, At the time of the Battle of Earth, it again doesn't appear that S.W.O.R.D has defensive capabilities that are ready to engage Thanos and protect the Earth. While in 2023, S.W.O.R.D may exist, and they may be creating defensive capabilities and setting Earth up with the knowledge it requires of the wider universe, it's still fair to assume that it's still not yet a fighting force, even without the challenge of not having Fury at the helm. From here though, Fury is definitively back in the MCU. When the blip occurs to bring back everyone who was snapped out of existence, apparently roughly 8 months pass until we finally see the actual Fury aboard the spaceship. During that 8-month period, he has managed to make his way up into space to complete a mission. While there, he has found it prudent to send Talos to Earth to impersonate him, in service of Earth's continued protection. It's fair to make an assumption that Fury's mission in space is working towards managing threats that are bigger than the world-destroying elementals that are supposedly attacking Earth at the start of Spider-Man Far From Home. Even when we consider that at the end of the film Talos has hidden from Fury the threat of Mysterio, it doesn't really make any sense that earlier on he would have hidden the threat of the elementals. Following the film's timeline, Talos would have had ample time to contact Fury about this threat to the end of the world, and the new mysterious man who had arrived through from another universe to help Earth stop these entities. Not only would he have had time, it just doesn't make sense that he wouldn't have contacted Fury about the elementals. Fury may have told Talos not to contact him, and Talos may have wanted to handle the situation without bothering Fury, but it just doesn't track that Talos would not have taken 2 minutes to make Fury aware of the elemental threat. More notably, it's not reasonable to believe that Fury would let himself be completely blind to what is occurring on Earth for a period of weeks, with a phone and Talos his only method of communicating with Earth. Fury is the spy. Communication and knowledge are his currencies. And as one of Earth's top defenders, it doesn't track at all that he'd be out of the loop regarding the elementals, Quentin Beck and Mysterio. Now, it's possible that while in space, most of his information is from sources like news media, governments and spy agencies. It's possible it's difficult for Fury to acquire exact and specific details, and he is relying on receiving updates from Talos and others to keep him informed of the full picture on Earth. But ultimately, it makes the most sense that Fury is aware of what's happening on Earth for the entirety of Spider-Man Far From Home. We don't know exactly how much of Far From Home Talos is impersonating Fury, but there are minor details throughout the movie that do suggest it is for the whole movie. At the end of the movie, when Talos' wife Soren is revealed to have also been impersonating Maria Hill, it insinuates that Hill is almost definitely in space as well. That Hill and Fury are both in space, leaving Earth to fend with a possible world-ending threat, indicates that their mission in space requires the full presence of both of them. The movie's official art book, The Art of Spider-Man Far From Home, contains an interview with Maria Hill actor Kobe Smulders, in which she reflects that for Fury and Hill, the threat faced in the film is just another day at work. All of this adds further weight to the assumption that what is being worked on in space is of much higher value to Earth's safety and survival than something that could potentially destroy the planet. Coming back to WandaVision, after the first 2 episodes, it's still unclear when exactly the series is set in the MCU timeline. But when we remember that along with the 3rd Tom Holland Spider-Man movie and the Doctor Strange sequel, that WandaVision is apparently part of a Phase 4 trio of releases built around the wider multiverse, it's incredibly probable that chronologically, WandaVision is occurring after the end of Spider-Man Far From Home, which ends around July 2024 in the MCU timeline. Of these 3 releases, WandaVision's release date has always been before the other 2. So when we consider the timing of the first appearance of S.W.O.R.D at the end of the first episode of WandaVision, It's likely Fury's initial planning for an organization like S.W.O.R.D started decades prior. It's very likely that for at least roughly the previous decade since S.H.I.E.L.D. collapsed in 2014, Fury has been working towards setting up a new organization with the capacity to deal with major extraterrestrial threats, an organization just like S.W.O.R.D. It's certain that there has been 8 months since Fury returned to existence, and he has been putting his all into a mission that he's leading with Maria Hill from on a spaceship supported by the Skrulls and likely other people. It's highly probable that the mission Fury has been leading is the implementation of S.W.O.R.D. And importantly, it's a reasonable assumption to make that some time elapses between the end of Far From Home and the first episode of WandaVision. With the first 2 episodes of WandaVision introducing S.W.O.R.D by way of 2 appearances of their logo and an appearance by an actor who is known to later in the series be playing a S.W.O.R.D agent, we don't have much to go on yet about what S.W.O.R.D is and how its path is crossed with that of Wanda Maximoff in the year 2024. But if Nick Fury is responsible for creating and now running S.W.O.R.D, and that's a probable but still yet to be confirmed if, then we can expect the organization to become a big player in Phase 4 of the MCU. It's a possibility that S.W.O.R.D could fulfill a role similar to that of S.H.I.E.L.D. in Phase 1 of the MCU. But as negative perceptions remain towards non-democratically appointed surveillance and defense agencies following the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's possible that S.W.O.R.D could initially be an antagonist, at least until they manage to prove their worth. It's a near certainty that right now, Wanda Maximoff is in some sort of state where she is not conscious to the real world, and that S.W.O.R.D are monitoring her in this situation. Exactly what this state is, and whether S.W.O.R.D are responsible for it, is still not yet known. Nor is whether they're trying to keep her in this state, rescue her from it, or even impact her while she's in this state of being. It's a fairly safe assumption to make, though, that S.W.O.R.D will be an active player in the rest of the series. Given WandaVision's multiverse grouping with the upcoming Spider-Man and Doctor Strange movies, it's a very likely possibility that these 2 could also feature S.W.O.R.D in some manner. Following WandaVision, S.W.O.R.D agent Maria Rambeau is set to return in Captain Marvel 2, released at the end of 2022. And it seems a likely probability that S.W.O.R.D would again feature in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, set to be released in 2023. Its plot will likely heavily involve the quantum realm, and its cast features Kang the Conqueror, a key Marvel antagonist known for travelling through time and also space. Most notably, currently in development by Marvel is the series Secret Invasion, starring Nick Fury and Talos. The Secret Invasion comic storyline from 2008 was the culmination of a subtle, long-term invasion of Earth by the Skrulls. Skrulls shapeshifted to replace characters including Spider-Woman, Elektra, Black Bolt, Hank Pym, Edward Jarvis, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. How the MCU will treat the Secret Invasion story is unknown at this stage. It could be that Talos has decided that the Skrulls have gone without a home planet for long enough, and that integrating on Earth is their best possible option. This would pit Talos against Fury, which would be a very exciting matchup as they've been on the same side. It's also possible that a group of Skrulls defect from Talos' leadership and invade Earth of their own accord, believing this will grant them a better life than working endlessly in service of S.W.O.R.D. This would see Talos placed in an interesting position of working with Fury to stop the rogue Skrulls, whilst also having to lead and be true to his people. What we can assume fairly safely is that starting from now, there's a possibility that any person featuring in Phase 4 of the MCU could turn out to be a Skrull in disguise. Who is being impersonated is anyone's guess. But it will be up to Fury to stop them, likely as leader of the MCU's new pivotal agency, S.W.O.R.D. Thanks very much for listening, and if you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe for more.